The armor didn't fit, but the calling did. What if the smallest voice silenced the loudest giant? He brought a sling. The giant brought a spear. Guess who left standing? 40 days a giant roared. On day 41, a shepherd sang God's name, and the valley went silent. This is the story of David, the shepherd made king, and the giant. 1 Samuel, chapter 17.
The dawn over Bethlehem was the color of fresh bread, pale gold on the hillsides. David moved lightly across the pasture, counting noses and nicks on his father's flock. He knew each sheep by its crooked ear or smoky patch of wool. The sling at his belt, 2 cords and a leather pouch rubbed smooth by use, was as familiar as his own hands. He'd learned what a shepherd must: to guide, to mend, to sing, and when needed, to fight. A lion once crouched in the broom grass and carried off a lamb. A bear came another season, heavy-footed and sure of itself. David had chased both, stunned them with a stone, and dragged the lambs free. He still remembered the rough heat of the lion's mane in his fists, the wild steam of the bear's breath, memories that left him both trembling and strangely calm.
David!
His father's voice traveled from the homestead. Jesse stood with a travel sack and a bundle wrapped in linen.
Your brothers are with Saul's army in the Valley of Elah. Take them roasted grain and loaves, and these cheeses for their commander. Bring back word of how they fare.
David slung the provisions over his shoulder and set out along the ridge paths. He passed vineyards and terraced fields. Then the country grew rugged, and the land flared open into a long bowl. The valley where Israel and the Philistines stood on opposing hillsides, the dry creek bed like a pale seam between them. The air tasted metallic, like it does when many men carry weapons in the sun. He found the supply lines, soldiers with dust on their ankles and bravado in their voices, and then he found his brothers, Eliab, Abinadab, and Shammah, buckled into armor and weary with sweat. He'd barely handed over the bread when a horn call rolled down the Philistine slope, and the lines of men shifted. A giant strode into the valley floor, a mountain of a man in scaly bronze that flashed like fish in water. Over his face a helmet, on his chest a coat of mail so heavy it would have nailed another man flat to the earth. He leaned on a spear whose shaft was as thick as a weaver's beam, iron head gleaming, and a shield-bearer went before him like a small boat, bobbing ahead of a storm.
I am Goliath of Gath.
The giant's voice rang off the stone walls of the valley.
Choose a man, and let him come down to me. If he kills me, we will be your servants. But if I prevail, you will be ours.
He mocked Israel's ranks, mocked their God. The sound of it felt wrong in David's bones, like a sour note played too loudly. Around him, men looked away. Some muttered they'd seen this challenge every morning and evening for 40 days.
There's a reward for the man who can face him,
someone whispered, listing riches, the king's favor, even marriage into Saul's house. Yet their feet stayed planted.
Who is this uncircumcised Philistine?
David said,
that he should defy the armies of the living God.
He didn't mean to sound bold, only truthful. The words stung his eldest brother. Eliab swung on him.
Why have you come down? With whom have you left those few sheep? I know your pride.
The rebuke burned.
Was it not only a word?
David answered, softer now, then turned to others with the same question. Word of the shepherd boy with 2 clear eyes traveled quickly. Before the valley heat had thinned, David stood inside the king's tent. Saul was taller than other men, but just then he seemed smaller than his armor. He studied David in puzzlement.
You cannot go to fight this Philistine. You are a youth. He has been a man of war from his youth.
David's voice didn't waver.
Your servant kept his father's sheep. When a lion or a bear took a lamb, I went after it. I struck it and delivered the lamb from its mouth. When it rose against me, I seized it by the beard and struck it down. The Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will deliver me from this Philistine."
Something in Saul's expression, pride, weariness, a remembered courage, softened. He nodded once, as if gambling on a small candle in a long night.
Go, and the Lord be with you.
Saul's attendants fastened his bronze helmet on David's head and draped the king's mail over the youth's shoulders. The armor slid and clanked, too large, too heavy, too foreign.
"I cannot go with these,"
David said, testing his steps. He unbuckled the straps and let the metal settle like a sigh on the rugs. Outside, the air tasted sweet after the tense, heavy breath. David took up what he knew, his shepherd's staff, his sling, and the quiet certainty that the God who had walked with him in the fields would not abandon him in a valley. He jogged down the slope toward the dry creek bed and crouched among the sun-warmed stones. He sorted the river's memory through his fingers, jagged ones, flat ones, stones that felt alive with balance, and chose 5, smooth and round, each fitting his palm like a promise. He slipped them into the shepherd's pouch, then rose and crossed into the open where the Philistine waited. Goliath saw him coming and barked a laugh that rolled like thunder.
Am I a dog that you come to me with sticks?
He spat curses in the names of his gods.
Come here and I'll give your flesh to the birds of the air.
David stopped at a distance a slinger knows is true, near enough to find the mark, far enough to keep his legs under him. He called back,
"You come with sword, spear, and javelin. I come in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel's armies, whom you have defied. Today the Lord will deliver you into my hand, that all the earth may know there is a God in Israel."
The shield-bearer stepped aside. Goliath lowered his massive head and began to move, each stride chewing up ground. David didn't wait. He ran straight toward the giant, feet eating the earth. His hand found the stone, his sling unfurled, cord steady, circling once, twice, thrice. The valley's noise fell away. The only sound was the whisper of leather and the boring hum of the stone cutting its small tunnel through the morning. He loosed. The stone sped, a simple thing hurled by a boy's arm, and a god's appointment. It struck Goliath's forehead where the helmet's rim left a crescent of flesh, unguarded. The impact sounded like a hammer finding nail. The giant's eyes widened, his hand grasped for air. He pitched forward, armor shrieking, the ground answering with a thud that trembled in David's calves. Dust leapt and hung. David didn't stop to marvel. He ran, leapt the fallen shield, and reached for the sword at the giant's side. It took both hands to free it from its scabbard. The blade was a length of river light, too big, too heavy, but enough. He lifted and brought it down. When the sword rose, it carried an ending with it. Silence cracked, and then the valley exploded into motion. The Philistines, seeing their champion fallen, turned from jeers to panic. A wavering shout shivered along their ranks, and then they were running, armor clattering, banners swallowed by the slope. From the Israelite hillside came a roar like a dam breaking. Men who had stood paralyzed moments before surged forward as one body, pouring past David, past the great carcass like a toppled idol, chasing their enemies up the road toward Ekron. David stood with the sword in his hands and his chest heaving. The world came back in pieces, the ache in his forearm, the scrape on his knee, the awareness of blood drying on the blade. He looked up the hill to where Saul's standard fluttered, then down to the creek where water glinted in shallow pools, as if nothing unusual had happened at all. By afternoon, the valley smelled of trampled grass and victory. Israel's men returned with laughter that had a sharp edge of disbelief. They carried spoils and stories. Later, David stood again before Saul, not in borrowed armor, but with the giant's sword laid at his feet and the proof of his victory carried in his arms. The king's eyes searched the boy's face, looking for what had shifted in the world between morning and evening. Outside the tent, Jonathan, Saul's son, stood silently at the doorway, his gaze fixed on David with a recognition that would grow into a friendship strong as cedar. When David left the valley, the afternoon sun angled long on the hills. He carried no crown, no medal, only a shepherd's sling at his belt, and the knowledge that God does not measure a man the way men do. He had walked into a place ruled by contempt and fear, and spoke the name he'd learned to sing over his sheep. The same God who taught his hands to pull a lamb from the mouth of a lion had taught them to steady a sling. The same God who anoints kings in hidden ways had chosen to topple a tyrant with a river stone. Nothing about that valley would be the same again. The story of David and Goliath teaches us that God doesn't measure victory by size or status. He works through willing hearts and ordinary tools offered in faith. When we trust Him and step forward with what we already have, He turns ordinary obedience into extraordinary victory.
Thank you for joining us today. If this story has blessed your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more interesting Bible stories.